My name is Shelley Bosshi, 34 years old. New Year's Eve always used to feel like a held breath in our house. Popcorn bowls brimming, the TV countdown bouncing at the bottom of the screen. My own kids in flannel pajamas pretending not to be waiting for the fireworks. Tonight I wanted that breath to belong to us, to my little family, to a quiet promise I'd whispered to myself in early December. No more being the default babysitter. Before we continue, please subscribe to the channel and tell us where you're listening from. For 5 years, I've been the family assumption in human form. If mom had dinner plans, we're bringing the kids. If my older sister had a quick errand, it could mean an entire weekend. No heads up, no, is this okay? Just the soft threat of disappointment if I even considered saying no. I told myself I didn't mind because I love my niece and nephew. But love without boundaries becomes something else. It becomes a funnel. Your time, your energy, your money, all poured into an open mouth that never says thank you. So, when my phone lit up that afternoon, "You'll take them overnight, we have plans." I stared at the message until the words stopped meaning anything. It wasn't a question, it was the weather. It was a fact. The doorbell of my life ringing itself. I didn't reply. Instead, I took a pen and a piece of cardstock from the craft drawer. My hands were steady in a way they hadn't been in years. I wrote, "We are not available tonight. Do not leave the children. Shelley." I taped it to the front door so the tape made a crisp, decisive sound. Behind me, Noah, my boyfriend, watched in that quiet way of his, leaning one shoulder against the hallway wall. "You sure?" he asked softly. "Yes." He didn't say I was being dramatic. He didn't remind me of the fallout. He just nodded, went to the kitchen and returned with hot cocoa packets, like a man choosing sides without a speech. By 7, the house smelled like cinnamon and microwave butter. My kids were arguing over which animated movie was most New Year's appropriate. When the driveway lights flashed across the living room, my stomach didn't drop. It just held. The car doors opened. Backpacks tumbled out first, then 2 small figures in thin hoodies. My niece with a glittery party hat already bent at the tip. On the porch, they hesitated. My mother and sister waved from the glossy darkness of the car like chauffeurs dismissing their passengers. They expected the door to open itself. It didn't. They walked the kids up at last. I watched from the hallway unseen, the way you watch the last seconds of a familiar dream. My sister glanced at the note. Her face did something sharp. The knocking started. Mom first, then my sister. Each pound like an accusation that I'd broken a law we never wrote down. I didn't move. My son tugged my sleeve. "Is something wrong?" "No," I told him. "We're just not opening the door tonight." The knocking escalated to shouting, to the use of my full name like a weapon. Then the calls began. I let the phone ring. After the 3rd call, texts came rapid fire. "Are you serious? Shelley, open up. You're being ridiculous." I set the phone face down. Noah sat between our 2 kids with the remote and said, "Ready." When they chorused "ready," he hit play. The movie's first bright notes swallowed the muffled voices outside, and then after a while, the house went very quiet. I crossed to the window and lifted the corner of the curtain. On the porch, my niece was rereading the note while my nephew blinked up at the peephole as if he could will my eye to appear there. Down on the driveway, Mom's phone lit her face an unflattering blue. My sister's mouth was a hard line. 10 minutes later, I watched my sister's expression change from anger to something like fear, a new light from her phone. She showed Mom. The blue glow bounced between their faces and then both their heads snapped toward the house, toward the unseen me. I knew exactly what they were looking at. The joint account. The one I opened years ago when we all promised to contribute for the kids. I had been the only one actually contributing thousands over the years, while they told me how generous we all were. What they didn't understand was that legally, the account was mine. I had opened it in my name because someone had to. On December 30th, I transferred every dollar out. When they saw the balance drop, I felt the shock travel from their screens to the porch planks. I didn't gloat. I didn't feel free either. I felt correct, like a picture finally straight on the wall. The knocking stopped. The shouting stopped. My phone buzzed and then went still. For a long minute, no one moved. Then in a moment I will always replay with a mixture of fury and disbelief. My mother and sister turned, walked down the steps, got into the car, and drove away. They left 2 children on my porch at 7:43 p.m. in late December, with breath fogging the porch light and party hats making silhouettes on the frosted glass. My daughter's voice, small. Mom. I opened the door. The cold slapped the hallway. I stretched my arms out to the kids without a speech, without even a question, and they came in all at once, the way birds do when a storm breaks. I closed and locked the door, turned the deadbolt with a finality that clicked through my chest. We didn't talk about the porch. I told them to take off their shoes, pressed warm mugs into their hands, and restarted the movie like this was the plan all along. My niece sat close to my daughter, that crushed party hat, now a flimsy crown, she didn't bother to remove. My nephew tucked his knees to his chest and laughed too loud at the first joke, like laughter might be the ticket price for staying. Noah brought blankets and spread them with a flourish. I watched his hands, the quiet competence of them, the way they told my whole nervous system, we have this. Midnight came. We toasted with sparkling cider. 4 kids and 2 adults, and a new fragile silence. Not peaceful, just thinner. Like tissue paper stretched over something heavy. No call from Mom, no text from my sister. At 1:47 a.m., my phone rang with an unknown number. I almost let it go to voicemail, then answered in a whisper, "Hello." A child's whisper back, "Aunt Shell." My stomach dropped into my knees. It was my younger nephew, the one who wasn't on my couch. His voice shook. I could hear air moving around him like a draft. "Where are you?" I asked. "At home," he said. "We were told to wait." The house. My sister's house. The one with the broken weather strip I'd offered to fix. I closed my eyes and could see the front door hanging open in my mind, the way it sometimes refused to latch unless you lifted it just so. "Unlock the door if you can," I told him, already pulling on my boots. Noah didn't ask where. He only said, "Be careful," and placed his hand for 1 second at the small of my back like a benediction. My kids were asleep. My niece's party hat slid to the floor and lay there like a small, defeated thing. The drive carved a tunnel through the dark. Streetlights gave way to the kind of neighborhood where porch bulbs burn out and stay out. I knew before I hit the curb that the front door would be ajar. It was. The house was black, cold, and still. Inside, my nephews were curled like commas on a couch that shouldn't have been this cold. A dead phone rested between them like an apology. No food, no water, a note on the fridge. The familiar handwriting slanted and brisk. "Don't touch anything." I took them home wrapped in the thickest blankets I had in the trunk, the kind I bring to soccer sidelines in January. In the rearview mirror, I saw 2 small faces relax in stages like someone was loosening a tourniquet. Back at my house, I tucked them beside their cousins, 4 sleeping children forming a messy snowdrift of limbs and quilts. I stood at the window and stared out at the dark street, the porch light making a bright circle on the steps. An island. The taped note still fluttered slightly when the heater kicked on. My phone buzzed at noon the next day with 1 text from my mother. "You betrayed us. Not are they safe. Not thank you. Not even why did you take them." Noah read it over my shoulder and I felt more than saw the way his jaw set. Not hard, not angry, just decided. "Then they don't know what betrayal is," he said quietly. The house got very quiet again. The kind of quiet that makes you count heartbeats. I'd thought all these years that I was being helpful, useful, the good daughter, the dependable sister. But sometimes being good is just being convenient. And convenience was over. Outside, the note held its place on the door like a line drawn across a map of my life. The first true boundary I'd ever made. The house was still. The kind of quiet that seeps into your bones and makes the air itself feel fragile. Midnight had already passed, and the kids were curled into their makeshift nest of blankets. their small breaths rising and falling in uneven rhythm. The faint glow from the TV flickered across their faces, turning the living room into a soft, wavering lantern. I was just beginning to let my shoulders drop when the phone buzzed against the countertop. Unknown number. I almost ignored it. Almost. "Hello?" I whispered. The reply came in a child's trembling voice. "Aunt Shell." My heart slammed against my ribs. It was my younger nephew, the one who wasn't here. I could hear the wind moving around him, the kind that finds every crack in a doorframe. "Where are you?" I asked, already fearing the answer. "At home," he said. "We were told to wait." The image snapped into my mind before I could stop it. Their front door, the broken weather strip, the way it never fully latched unless you lifted it just right. I didn't think. I moved. Boots, keys, coat. Noah didn't ask questions. He just touched the small of my back with the steadiness that had always been his language. The drive cut through black roads and frozen neighborhoods. I knew what I'd find before I saw it. A dark house. A door left open. 2 boys curled like commas on a couch too cold for comfort. A dead phone lay between them like an apology. A note on the fridge, brisk and slanted in my sister's handwriting. "Don't touch anything. No food, no heat, just absence." I wrapped them in the thickest blankets from my trunk, the ones meant for icy soccer sidelines. In the rearview mirror, I watched their faces unclench slowly, like a rope being untied knot by knot. When we pulled into my driveway, the porch light cut a clean circle into the night. I carried them inside and tucked them beside their cousins. 4 children, 1 storm, all breathing the same fragile air. At the window, I stood and watched the street, the taped note still fluttering against the door. The next day at noon, my phone buzzed with a single text from my mother. "You betrayed us? Not, are they safe? Not, thank you? Not, why? Just that. Betrayal." Noah read it over my shoulder, his jaw tightening in quiet resolve. "Then they don't know what betrayal is," he said softly. The house was silent again, but not the same kind of silence. This one felt sharper, like something clean had finally been cut away. All these years I thought I was being good, the reliable daughter, the dependable sister. But goodness had only ever meant one thing to them: convenience, and convenience was over. Outside, the note on the door held its place like a drawn line across my life. A boundary, the first real one I had ever made. The second night settled over the house like a blanket stretched too thin, letting the cold slip through the edges. The children were asleep, piled together in a quiet fortress of quilts and shared breaths. I was just starting to think the silence might hold when the phone rang again, the number unfamiliar. This time it wasn't a child's whisper, but a man's voice, rough and frayed with exhaustion. "Shelley, this is Marcus," he said. The name caught somewhere between memory and confusion. "Marcus Caldwell, I'm their father. I'm there." His words carried the weight of a man who had been waiting too long. "I heard what happened," he continued quickly, breath catching between sentences. "Are they safe? Are they with you?" I could hear the wind outside his car, the engine humming beneath his words. "Yes," I said. "They're here. They're safe." His exhale came through the line like someone finally breathing after months underwater. "I was told they were fine," he said quietly, "that they didn't want to talk to me anymore." I closed my eyes, already sensing the layers of lies that had been woven behind my back. "Where are you?" I asked. "Halfway across Illinois," he answered. "I've been driving since morning. I'll be there before midnight. Please don't send them back before I arrive." There was no part of me that even considered saying no. After I hung up, Noah looked at me from across the kitchen, and when I whispered, "Their dad," he only nodded, steady as stone. "Good," he said simply. "Let him come." An hour later, a text lit up my screen. "Crossed the state line. 90 minutes out." I glanced toward the living room, where the kids had built a pillow fort around the couch, cartoons flickering softly. Everything I'd ever believed about my sister's marriage started to feel shaky, like old wallpaper peeling at the corners. Maybe the stories she told weren't the whole truth. Maybe they never had been. By the time headlights rolled up the driveway at 11:03 p.m., the house was silent except for the whisper of the heater. I peeked through the curtain and saw him step out. Tall, worn from travel, eyes bright with the sharp edge of hope. The door opened before I could reach it. Two small figures bolted past me barefoot, sprinting into the night. "Dad!" The sound that came from him wasn't just a sob. It was a fracture in time, a wound breaking open and healing at the same moment. He fell to his knees on the frozen ground, arms wide, and they collided with him in a tangle of limbs and shivering laughter. Frost glimmered in their hair. For the first time, no one was waiting at a door that wouldn't open. When he finally looked up at me, his eyes were rimmed red but clear. "Thank you," he whispered. "Come inside," I said. "They've had cocoa. You should too." Inside, while the kids thawed out, Marcus sat at the kitchen table with Noah and me. His hands shook slightly as he pulled a folder from his backpack. Letters, birthday cards, crayon drawings. Each envelope was addressed to the children. Every single one was stamped "Return to sender." Some bore my sister's handwriting with sharp, slanted letters. "Do not give her this." The air thickened. Next came the screenshots. Bank transfers sent month after month to my mother or sister. Not court-ordered payments, but extra money for clothes, groceries, trips. Money the kids had never seen. "She told me they were struggling," Marcus said, voice low and tight. "I sent what I could. But they never saw a dime." Then he slid the final paper across the table. An emergency custody petition. Signed 4 days before New Year's Eve. "I didn't file it," he admitted. "Not until this morning. I wanted to believe they were safe." He paused, swallowing hard. "But I know better now." Morning came with a pale light stretching through the curtains, soft and colorless, the way winter mornings always are after a storm. The house smelled faintly of toast and cocoa, the scent wrapping around the edges of the night before, like a quiet promise that things could be different. The kids stirred slowly, blinking into the light, tangled in blankets that still held the warmth of a house that didn't abandon them. For the first time in a long time, no one was rushing them out the door. No orders barked, no raised voices, just the sound of breathing and the steady hum of the heater. Marcus sat at the kitchen table, hands wrapped around a mug, shoulders hunched the way people sit when they're finally safe enough to be tired. The children hovered around him like moths to a single warm light. My sister's absence filled the air, loud in its own way. The phone had stopped buzzing. The silence was its own confession. She knew. My mother knew. They were waiting for the fallout to bend me like every other time. Only this time the line had already been drawn, and I wasn't moving. Later that afternoon, a caseworker from Child Services knocked on the door. A woman with sharp eyes softened by years of listening. She spoke gently, but directly, asking questions about the night, about the call, about the children left alone. Marcus answered everything, his voice steady, his story aligning too perfectly with what I had lived through. The note still clung to the front door, a quiet piece of evidence in permanent marker. "You did the right thing," she said to me before leaving, her clipboard held like a verdict already decided. The hearing was scheduled within the week. I didn't attend to take sides. I went because someone had to sit in the back and keep the children's eyes on something steady. My sister didn't look at me when they led her in. Her face was tight with disbelief, as if betrayal was something done to her, not something she had built out of neglect. My mother sat 2 rows behind, hands folded tight in her lap, her gaze flicking anywhere but toward me. Marcus spoke calmly. His lawyer laid out every detail: the text messages, the bank records, the abandonment, no theatrics, just the quiet weight of truth. When the ruling came down, it was as clear as the line on my door had been that night. Custody granted to Marcus Caldwell. Immediate transfer. Limited supervised visitation for Clara. Mandatory counseling. The sound of the gavel struck the table like a single final heartbeat. My sister's shoulders slumped, but she didn't cry. She just stared at the floor like the world had betrayed her. My mother didn't speak to me as she left the courtroom, and I didn't follow her. The night the kids left with Marcus, the house was silent in a way that was both empty and whole. Sophie wrapped her arms around my waist so tight I felt her heartbeat against mine. "Thank you," she whispered. Ben didn't speak, just buried his face into my jacket before running toward the car. Their younger brother clung to Marcus's hand like it was the only map he needed. I stood at the top of the steps and watched as the taillights disappeared down the road. The cold air stung my cheeks but didn't reach the place inside me that finally felt steady. Inside, Noah was waiting by the kitchen counter, a mug in each hand. "You did it," he said. Not like it was a victory, more like it was a truth. I sat down, letting the weight of everything fall into the quiet between us. There was no applause, no cinematic ending. Just a clean, still space where a storm had lived for too long. The boundary wasn't loud anymore. It was simply there, fixed and unshakable. Days passed. The house was lighter, emptier, but not in a way that ached. It was the kind of emptiness that comes after cleaning out a room and realizing you can breathe. My sister's calls went unanswered. My mother's silence became a wall. But none of that felt like a loss. It felt like a choice. For once, my life wasn't built around their needs. It was mine. And when New Year's Eve finally ended, it didn't feel like a closed door. It felt like the beginning of something I had built myself. I stood at that same door a week later, the tape residue from the note still visible, a faint scar of the line I had drawn. It wasn't pretty. It wasn't meant to be. But it was real. And it held. The first morning without the kids felt strange in a way I couldn't quite name. The house wasn't silent. The kettle still whistled. Noah still hummed under his breath. The heater clicked in its steady rhythm. But it was a softer quiet, a kind that didn't demand anything from me. The walls no longer carried the echo of anxious laughter or the sound of tiny footsteps searching for safety. It was a quiet that didn't ache. It simply was. And for the first time in years, I didn't feel like I was waiting for someone to need me before I could exhale. I spent that morning making coffee slowly, the way I used to before my life turned into other people's emergencies. I sat at the kitchen table with both hands around the mug, letting the heat seep into my palms. The note was gone now, but the line it had drawn still hummed beneath my skin. Noah came in with that easy calm of his, wrapping a scarf around his neck, and leaned against the doorway like he always belonged here. "It's quiet," he said, and it wasn't a question. I nodded. "Yeah, but it's the right kind of quiet, kind of." Later that week, Marcus sent a picture. The 3 kids sitting at a small kitchen table, pancake batter smeared across the youngest one's cheeks, laughter frozen in the pixels like sunlight caught in a jar. Beneath it, just 3 words. "We're okay now." I stared at that photo longer than I meant to. It wasn't just proof they were safe. It was proof that the night on my porch had changed more than just my life. It had given them back a future. And maybe, in its own way, it had given me one too. I didn't respond right away. I let the image sit in the quiet, let it become part of the room, part of the air. Later, I typed back, "I'm glad. You all deserve this." His reply came quickly, a simple thank you that didn't try to carry more than it needed to. Not every ending had to be a war. Some just needed space to breathe. Winter began to thaw in small ways after that. Not the dramatic kind of spring that comes overnight, but the quiet, patient kind that creeps in around the edges of cold. Frost melted slower each morning. The air outside didn't bite quite as sharply. Neighbors waved when I stepped out for the mail, the ordinary rhythm of life settling into place without the constant weight of someone else's crisis pressing at my door. The porch felt different now. Not like a place where a boundary had been tested, but where one had finally held. One afternoon, as we watched the last traces of snow soften on the pavement, Noah reached for my hand without a word. He didn't have to say it. I knew what he meant, that this was what we had been building toward quietly, a life not defined by someone else's chaos. "You okay?" he asked. I smiled, really smiled this time. "Yeah, I think I actually am."